Welcome to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation, the Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, December 8th, 2019, and we are live tonight. We have a jam-packed show for you tonight. So much going on. It's been 2 weeks since we've been on the air, and we know last week it was the station was shut down for the holidays, so we have a lot to cover. All right, so we see that the impeachment inquiry hearings are heating up. We saw this past week legal experts testify that Donald Trump should be impeached. We saw Nancy Pelosi said that Trump leaves us no choice. She has asked the House Judiciary Committee to draw up articles of impeachment against one Donald John Trump. They should have done this some months ago after the Mueller report came out. So we're going to talk about the developments in the impeachment inquiry. We know that hearings in the House Judiciary Committee will take place this week, and you're going to see more history being made, number one, but number two, a lot of people are getting a history lesson and also a lesson in law and constitutional law as well. All right, so also, you know, I did a broadcast on Thanksgiving Day dealing with the history of Thanksgiving and dealing with Thanksgiving is a national day of mourning, okay, a national day of mourning. And on Thanksgiving Day, Colin Kaepernick spoke at an Un-Thanksgiving Day event in honor of Native Americans, okay? He spoke at an Un-Thanksgiving Day event in honor of Native Americans. So we're going to talk some about that, and we'll do with a little bit of the history of Thanksgiving, but we'll talk about it from a perspective that most people don't know. We'll talk about it from the perspective of the Wampanoag Native Americans, who were the Native Americans who basically had a treaty with those Europeans who were on the Mayflower, okay, there in Plymouth, Massachusetts. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about that. I did I think maybe it was a 2-hour broadcast. It's on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network. The African History Network is also on my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, I-M-H-O-T-E-P, Michael Imhotep. So you can check it out there. And then R. Kelly is back in the news. We see that R. Kelly, New York Times is reporting that R. Kelly was charged with bribing a government official, a government employee, so Aaliyah could obtain a fake ID so she could marry him in 1994 when she was 15 years old. So, you know, I talked about this here on the show before. Aaliyah's from Detroit. Everybody in Detroit knew Aaliyah was underage when she married R. Kelly. It came up in Surviving R. Kelly. And in Surviving R. Kelly, people who worked with R. Kelly talked about documents being forged. But here we see federal charges coming, okay, behind that. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. Then also, you know, there was a study that came out back in 2012. BlackDoctor.org had an article, and also BET picked this up, from the American Journal of Epidemiology. This was back in 2012. New study links relaxers to fibroids. New study links hair relaxers to fibroids, okay? And they were talking about how this impacts African American women. Well, there was a study that just came out this past week that links hair straighteners and hair dyes to higher risks of cancer, especially in African American women. Okay, hair straighteners and hair dyes are linked to a higher risk of cancer, especially in African American women. All right, and you know, I've heard about this over the past few years, and I remember one person in particular talking about this was Dick Gregory. But there have been studies that have come out to back this up as well. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about that. And then, you know, BusinessInsider.com and a lot of the Journal of Nature and a lot of outlets picked up this story, and we hadn't had a chance to talk about it, so we're going to try to squeeze it in tonight. New study finds everyone alive today descended from an African woman who lived in Botswana about 200,000 years ago. Okay, and we're talking about the Khoisan, who have the oldest DNA on the planet, come from southern Africa, and they're the ancestors to the Ainu and the Twa. So we'll talk about that. You know, the first Friday of each month, the unemployment numbers come out. And Donald Trump always brags about usually brags about the unemployment numbers and how low the unemployment rate is, but he doesn't dig deeper into the unemployment numbers. The black unemployment rate may be low, but almost half of Americans work in low-wage jobs. Almost half of Americans work in low-wage jobs. Donald Trump doesn't want to deal with this at all. Okay, at the same time, he doesn't want to talk about increasing the federal minimum wage. So the House of Representatives, led by Democrats, they took control January 3rd, 2019, because African Americans and other people who had some sense went out and voted in midterm elections. And so Democrats could take back control of the House of Representatives from Republicans. Back in March of, back in July of 2019, Democrats passed a bill in the House of Representatives to raise the federal minimum wage by the year 2025 to $15 an hour. It's in the Senate right now, being blocked in the Senate by Senator Mitch McConnell and Republicans. I wonder why. Why isn't Trump talking about this at all? I can't figure that one out. So we'll deal with this and some more on the African History Network show tonight. So on the African History Network show, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world. Because right now it's corrects wrong behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you've been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. So when you control the radius of a man's thoughts, you can control the circumference of his actions, because the mind can't do or teach what it doesn't know. Now, we deal with a number of different topics here on the show. We deal with current events in history, politics, education, economic empowerment, entrepreneurship, relationships, love, sex, health issues, and much, much more. Sign up for our email newsletter. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T, to 22828 to sign up for our email newsletter. Also, go to our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Sign up for our email newsletter at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Also, right at the top of the page, click on the link. You can sign up for our email newsletter, okay? Follow us on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network. We're broadcasting there right now, and also on 910 AM Superstation's page as well, 910 AM Superstation. All right, I will be speaking at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. Once again, by popular demand, Malcolm X Grassroots Movement. They're doing the second day of Kwanzaa, Kujichagulia, on Friday, December 27th. The program is 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History, so I'll be speaking there. You don't want to miss that. Free and open to the public. The Charles H. Wright Museum is celebrating Kwanzaa all 7 days. They decided to celebrate it all 7 days after the community protested, so they made the right decision. Go to theright.org, W-R-I-G-H-T, theright.org for more information. And then also I'm speaking somewhere else one of those days. I got to give that to you. Deacon McConicle contacted me, and I'm speaking at a church one of those days, so I'll give you that information as well. All right. If you want me to do a presentation for your group or organization, email me at customerservice@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Customer service at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, and we'll make it happen. All right. Okay. So let me jump into. Let me see. Let's squeeze this in before the break. We're gonna go to clip 4 in just a minute. Then with Colin Kaepernick. What we're gonna do when we come back from the break, we'll jump into Donald Trump and the Impeachment Inquiry. Before the break, we're gonna deal with Colin Kaepernick going to the Un-Thanksgiving event. Okay. So. Colin Kaepernick said it's our responsibility to honor our elders. Colin Kaepernick spent Thanksgiving Day, addressing a group at the Indigenous Peoples Sunrise ceremony on San Francisco's Alcatraz Island. Now, Fox News reported the ceremony known as Un-Thanksgiving, which honors the 50th anniversary of when Native Americans began occupying the island. Okay. The Alcatraz Island, which formerly housed the infamous federal prison Alcatraz. Colin Kaepernick tweeted his support of the event. He said, quote, spent the morning at the Indigenous Peoples Sunrise Ceremony on the 50th anniversary of the occupation of Alcatraz. The U.S. government has stolen over 1.5 billion acres of land from indigenous people, and also African people were here for tens of thousands of years as well. So it was African people and Native Americans that the land was stolen from. Thank you to my indigenous family. I'm with you today and always, end quote, as he signed off with the Black Power fist. Now, Colin Kaepernick also retweeted a Washington Post perspective piece that shines a light on the racist root of Thanksgiving. Now, let me just say this. I may say some things that go outside the circumference of your own awareness. Just because you never heard them before, disagree with them, or don't like them does not mean that they are not true. It just means you have to do some research to understand what I'm talking about. Okay, so I'm dealing with history. I'm not against people getting together with their family on Thanksgiving, you know, things like that, and spending time with their families. So I'm not against that at all. And I talked about that in my broadcast also. Okay, but we're dealing with history here. Okay, so in an article the Washington Post had on right around Thanksgiving Day, I think it was November 27th, writer Christopher Petrella, who teaches in the Race, Gender, and Cultural Studies Collaborative at American University, states that Sarah Josepha Buell Hale, H-A-L-E, Sarah Josepha Hale, okay, known as the godmother of Thanksgiving. Now, Sarah Josepha Hale was also the woman that wrote the nursery rhyme, Mary Had a Little Lamb. She also wrote Mary Had a Little Lamb. That's Sarah Josepha Hale. She is the woman credited with the modern day incarnation of Thanksgiving. Okay, she went on a letter writing campaign, and she petitioned for it for a number of years, something like 25, 30 years, reaching out to politicians, etc. So it was in October 1863 that Abraham Lincoln held the first national day of thanks, which we call Thanksgiving. But she's known as Sarah Josepha Hale is known as the godmother of Thanksgiving. She suggested the holiday as a way to bring the nation together, much like the 4th of July. Christopher Petrella in the piece from the Washington Post said, quote, yet her conception of all of the people, quote unquote, all of the people who would observe this holiday excluded at least one group, free black people, as she made clear in an 1830 article titled 4th of July that appeared in the Ladies Magazine and Literary Gazette. In that piece, Sarah Josepha Hale wrote that, quote, it should not be argued, it should not be urged to have the slaves set at liberty till they can be sent to their own land, because they never can be free here. It should not be urged to have the slaves set at liberty till they can be sent to their own land, because they never can be free here. Okay? And then Petrella went on to state in the article, adding that while Sarah Josepha Hale was against slavery, she envisioned free slaves moving back to Africa and not living in America. This is very interesting, because we were here before you got here. I mean, that's very interesting. You know, that's like gentrification. We were here before you got here. What are you talking about? Now, Colin Kaepernick, the former NFL quarterback, has attended the Native American event for the past several years. In 2016, he tweeted a video showing a man taking the island by right of discovery. Okay, let's go to this clip. TheGrio.com has an article. Let's go to this clip here that Colin Kaepernick posted.
The Native Americans reclaimed this land known as Alcatraz Island in the name of all American Indians by right of discovery. We will purchase said Alcatraz Island for $24 in glass beads and red cloth, a precedent set by the white man's purchase of a similar island about 300 years ago. Signed, Indians of all tribes, November 1969, San Francisco, California.
It's been 50 years since the occupation, and that struggle has continued for that 50 years. Before that 50 years, it will continue from this point. It's our responsibility to honor our ancestors and honor our elders by carrying on that struggle. Don't let their sacrifices be in vain.
You got about 1 minute.
That's why it's important for all of us to be here today. To show that we're together, that we're unified, that we have that solidarity. And I hope this...
Okay. All right. So that was Colin Kaepernick at the Un-Thanksgiving Day event. TheGriot.com has a good article dealing with this. Colin Kaepernick spoke at Un-Thanksgiving Day event in honor of Native Americans. GRIO, The Griot. And I know we're coming up on the break. We're going to continue this for a couple minutes on the other side of the break, because I'm going to give you a little background history, and we're going to deal with that 1621. When we see that picture of Native Americans and quote-unquote pilgrims serving them in 1621, what we are told was the first Thanksgiving, how that meeting came together is not how we have been taught that it happened. So we're going to deal with what we see in that picture, but from the Wampanoag Native American perspective. We'll deal with that on the other side of the break, and then we'll deal with the Trump Impeachment Inquiry. 9:10 a.m. the Superstation, the Future Radio, the African History Network show. I'm Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes. Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation WFDF. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, December 8th, 2019. And we are live, okay? Shout out to everybody watching me on Facebook as well, on our fan page, the African History Network, the African History Network, and then also on 9:10 a.m. Superstation's Facebook page also, 9:10 a.m. Superstation. All right, I will be, let's see, Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History on December 19th. Thursday, December 19th, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. They are celebrating Dr. Carter G. Woodson's birthday. Now, Dr. Carter G. Woodson is the co-founder of the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. He's also the creator of Negro History Week in 1926, which in 1976 became Black History Month, and now that is African American History Month. All right. December 19th, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m., they are going to have a special guest, Dr. Payro Dagbovie, PhD, who's a history professor at Michigan State University. He also wrote a fantastic book on Dr. Carter G. Woodson, okay? And then also Dr. Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham, who is from who's the department chair at Victor S. Thomas, and she's a Victor S. Thomas Professor of History and of African American Studies, African and African American Studies at Harvard University. Okay, so this is taking place at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History, Thursday, December 19th, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m., free and open to the public. I should be there also, I think. All right, right before the break, we were talking about Colin Kaepernick attending a Un-Thanksgiving Day event, okay? And this took place in San Francisco, Alcatraz Island in San Francisco, all right? When we look at the history of Thanksgiving, we see that famous painting, okay? It's a painting done by John Leon Jerome, G-E-R-O-M-E, Jerome Ferris, okay? And it depicts what we were taught was the first Thanksgiving in 1621. But when we look at what really happened at that first Thanksgiving, we know that if we look at this article here from Indian Country Today, Indian Country Today, it talks about what really happened at the first Thanksgiving, the Wampanoag side of the story. And when you hear about the Pilgrims and the Indians harmoniously sharing the first Thanksgiving meal in 1621, the Indians referred to so generically are the ancestors of the contemporary members of the Wampanoag Nation. As the story commonly goes, the Pilgrims who sailed from England on the Mayflower and landed at what became Plymouth, Massachusetts in 1620 had a good harvest the next year. So Plymouth Governor William Bradford organized a feast to celebrate the harvest and to invite a group of Native American allies, including the Wampanoag chief Massasoit, okay, to the party. The feast lasted 3 days, and according to chronicler Edward Winslow, Governor William Bradford sent 4 men on a fowling mission to prepare for the feast, and the Wampanoag guests brought 5 deer to the party. And ever since then, the story goes, Americans have celebrated Thanksgiving on the 4th Thursday of November. But that's not exactly what historically happened. So Ramona Peters, who is the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribe's Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, she was interviewed by Indian Country Today Media Network, and she talked about what happened in 1621 at what we were taught was the first Thanksgiving. Okay, so when we look at the Wampanoag version of what really happened, you've probably heard the story of how Squanto, who was a Native American named Squanto, assisted in the planting of corn and taught the Europeans there how to plant corn, how to fish, things like this. So this was their first successful harvest, and they were celebrating that harvest and planning a day of their own Thanksgiving. And it's kind of like what some of the Arab nations do when they celebrate by shooting guns in the air. So this is what was going on over there at Plymouth, Massachusetts. They were shooting guns and cannons as a celebration, which alerted us, the Wampanoag. We didn't know who they were shooting at. So Massasoit, the chief, gathered some 90 warriors and showed up at Plymouth prepared to engage. If that was what was happening, if they were taking any of our people. The reason why they went to find out what was going on is because a treaty was signed between the Wampanoag Nation of Native Americans and the Europeans on the Mayflower, and they picked one person to represent the Europeans on the Mayflower, and he signed the treaty on behalf of the nation of England. Okay, so it was a treaty between the nation of England and the Wampanoag Nation to watch each other's back, to protect the Wampanoag from their enemies and to protect the European settlers from people who were trying to attack them. So when Massasoit and the Wampanoag hear the gunshots and the cannons being fired, they don't know what's going on. So they show up in force, okay, like Bumpy Johnson, okay, coming to back up Malcolm X to find out what's going on. All right, this is what happened. Okay, so they were shooting guns and cannons as a celebration, which alerted us because we didn't know who they were shooting at. So Massasoit gathered up some 90 warriors and showed up at Plymouth prepared to engage. If that was what was happening, if they were taking any of our people, they didn't know what was going on. It was a fact-finding mission. So when they arrived, it was explained through a translator that the European settlers were celebrating the harvest. So we decided to stay and make sure that was true, because we had seen in the other landings, like Captain John Smith in Virginia, even the Vikings had been there, had come to this land, okay, around 1000 AD. So we wanted to make sure, so we decided to camp nearby for a few days. During those few days, the men went out to hunt and gather food, deer, ducks, geese, and fish. There are 90 men here. There are 90 men here at the time. I think there are only 23 survivors of the Mayflower ship. So you can imagine the fear. Okay, so this is what was taking place. But when we see that painting, okay, from 1621, and we're told that's the first Thanksgiving, we see a misrepresentation of the history, how that painting came to be. Okay, so check out this article from Indian Country Today Media Network.com. What really happened at the first Thanksgiving, the Wampanoag side of the tale. Read the article from, which one is this other article? NBCWashington.com. NBCWashington.com. Native Americans to hold 50th gathering of grief in Plymouth, Massachusetts, because the United American Indians of New England each year in Plymouth, Massachusetts hold a National Day of Mourning commemoration, a National Day of Mourning commemoration. And they hold this solemn remembrance on every Thanksgiving Day. They've held it since 1970. to recall what organizers describe as, quote, the genocide of millions of Native people, the theft of Native lands, and the relentless assault on Native culture, end quote. Okay, so check out this article as well. And watch I did like a 2-hour broadcast on Thanksgiving Day going deep into all this history, and I don't have that time right now to get into it, but that gives you some background information. Okay, so let's jump to the impeachment inquiry of the traitor-in-chief, Donald John Trump, who I warned you about in 2016 on this station. I warned you about week after week, and people ain't want to listen to me. And everything I told you was going to happen has happened, and even more so. Okay, so I know a lot of people ain't listened, but you know, you're gonna learn fat meat is greasy. I tried to tell you. So this past week, on Tuesday, December 3rd, 2019, the Democratic-led House Intelligence Committee released a report, okay, containing a summary of the evidence it has collected in the impeachment inquiry of the first Russian president of the United States, Donald John Trump. The 300-page report cited 2 instances of misconduct by Donald Trump. 1, obstruction of the House inquiry investigation. 2, withholding an official White House meeting and U.S. military aid from Ukraine on the condition of investigating a Trump political rival. Okay, now, Representative Adam Schiff, Democrat of California, who's the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, said, quote, this report chronicles a scheme of the President of the United States to coerce an ally, Ukraine, that is at war with an adversary, Russia, into doing the Donald Trump's political dirty work. Okay, he said this at a press conference outlining his committee's findings. Now, the House Intelligence Committee voted 13-9 in a closed-door meeting on Tuesday, December 3rd, 2019, to send the report to the House Judiciary Committee, which started proceedings this past Wednesday. While the report, which was also prepared by the House Oversight and Foreign Affairs Committees, did not explicitly include recommendations of articles of impeachment, it strongly implies that obstruction of justice could be one of the articles of impeachment. The report noted that past presidents who were the subject of impeachment inquiries, unlike Donald Trump, because they had a better understanding of the Constitution, and even though, you know, they violated the Constitution, they still had some type of integrity. Even Richard Nixon had some type of integrity, but Donald Trump doesn't have any. These past presidents complied with subpoenas and requests for information from Congress on obstruction of justice, which was described as a, quote, campaign of intimidation, end quote, campaign of intimidation. The report from the House Intelligence Committee cast Trump's efforts to flout congressional oversight as unprecedented because of his refusal to hand over documents and make certain witnesses available. That's obstruction of justice. But it also noted that, quote, the House gathered overwhelming evidence. The House Intelligence Committee gathered overwhelming evidence of Donald Trump's misconduct from courageous individuals who were willing to follow the law, end quote. The report goes on to say, no other president has flouted the Constitution and power of Congress to conduct oversight to this extent. Quote, if left unanswered, President Trump's ongoing effort to thwart Congress impeachment power risks doing grave harm to the institution of Congress, the balance of power between our branches of government and the constitutional order that the president and every member of Congress have sworn to protect and defend, end quote. They take an oath not to a president. They're not, the Congress is not subjects of the king. They take an oath to defend the Constitution against enemies, both foreign and domestic. So you have an enemy of the Constitution, enemy of the state, if you will, in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue right now. So the report also constructed a detailed timeline of Donald Trump's alleged efforts to withhold military assistance that was approved by Congress, $391 million approved by Congress to aid Ukraine. as well as an official invitation to the Ukrainian new president, Vladimir Zelensky, to meet with Donald Trump in the White House. This timeline was based on the testimony of various aides and diplomats who have been questioned by impeachment investigators. Ukraine, quote, desperately wanted and needed, end quote, U.S. security assistance, as well as a White House meeting between its president, Vladimir Zelensky, and Donald Trump, Representative Adam Schiff, chair of the House Intelligence Committee, said. Adam Schiff went on to say, quote, at the same time, there was something President Trump desperately wanted and believed that he needed. And that was an investigation that would damage the rival that he feared the most, Joe Biden. An investigation that would damage the rival he feared the most, Joe Biden. As well as an investigation into a debunked conspiracy theory that it was Ukraine, not Russia, that interfered in our last election. So we see that conspiracy theory being fed by Russian oligarch Konstantin Kaepernick to Paul Manafort, and from Paul Manafort to Donald Trump. And we see some U.S. senators, like this idiot in Louisiana, Senator John Kennedy, repeating this debunked conspiracy theory to take pressure off of Russia. So as Nancy Pelosi said this past week, all roads lead to Russia. All roads lead to Russia and Vladimir Putin. So the report from the House Intelligence Committee included a number of new details that stemmed from AT&T phone records obtained by the House of Representatives, which showed someone who was using a phone number associated with the Office of Management and Budget, the OMB, called the president's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, who just got back from the Ukraine, once again chasing these conspiracy theories on behalf of his client, Donald John Trump. And Trump just recently said he didn't know if Rudy Giuliani was still his attorney. Rudy just got back. He said he was doing this on behalf of his client, Donald Trump. So somebody has amnesia. So somebody needs to take advantage of Obamacare and go get this checked out. Somebody has amnesia. Donald Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, in early August, during the period when the U.S. aid to Ukraine was frozen. That same day, call records show Rudy Giuliani also called the White House Situation Room 5 times, as well as the OMB number. Why is Rudy Giuliani, who doesn't work for the White House? Well, I mean, let me rephrase that. Rudy Giuliani has no position in federal government. He doesn't work for the White House. He's Donald Trump's personal attorney. He don't work for the White House. He's not a federal employee. Why is he calling the Situation Room? Why is he calling the Office of Management and Budget? To freeze the security assistance, which was announced to Trump administration officials on July 18th, and not reversed until September 11th, 2019, Donald Trump inquired about the aid in mid-June, and around July 12th, quote, directed that a hold be placed, end quote, on the aid to Ukraine, the report said. Directed that a hold be placed, end quote, on the aid, Ukraine said. And as MSNBC just reported the last couple of days, about all of the money was not even released to Ukraine. It's about $35 million that has not been released. The money was only released after they got caught. Because September 9th, the whistleblower reported what was going on. 1, 2, Democrats in the House of Representatives launched an investigation on September 11th. After the whistleblower blew the whistle, and after the investigation was launched, then Trump releases the money. So you got Republicans like Representative Jim Jordan of Ohio, who needs to be voted out of office, and Representative Mark Meadows of North Carolina, and Kevin McCarthy, okay, and Matt Gaetz of Florida, okay, who are saying, hey, you know, the money was released. Wait a second, you didn't release all the money, number one, and you only released it after you got caught. So, during, let me back up here. All right, so in making the decision to move forward we were struck by the fact that Donald Trump's misconduct was not an isolated occurrence. This ain't just a one-off. Now, keep in mind the July 25th telephone call that Trump had with President of the Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. That happened the day after Robert Mueller testified in front of Congress because Trump thought he got away with it. So he continued to do it. He thought he got away with it, so he continued to do it. This man, is something wrong with this fool. I tried to tell you in 2016, this dude ain't wrapped too tight. There's something wrong with him. In making the decision to move forward, we were struck by the fact that Donald Trump's misconduct was not an isolated occurrence, nor was it the product of a naive president. Quote, President Trump does not appear to believe there is any such limitation on his power to use White House meetings, military aid, or other official acts to procure foreign help in his re-election, end quote. So you have Republicans saying it's too close to the next election. Let's just leave it up to the voters. Wait a second, hold on. The Senate, the Republicans in the Senate have chosen 3 times not to pass legislation to secure the integrity of the next election. You talking about that election? You want people to you want to leave it up to voters to vote in that election? But you have a duty under the Constitution to hold the president accountable, and you want to kick the can down the street, and you don't want to do your job? Is that what you're trying to say? If you don't want to do your job, you shouldn't have a job. So we saw that Trump openly welcomed help from Russia in the 2016 election, and he got it. We saw that he was interviewed by George Stephanopoulos on ABC, and he was asked the same question. Wait a second, if a foreign country reached out to you and they said, we have dirt on your opponent, what would you do? He said, I think you would hear them out. He said, maybe you call it FBI. I think you would hear them out. See, one thing about Trump, everything he does, he told you he was going to do it. So you can't say he didn't tell you. Everything he does, he told you he was going to do it. So you can't sit there and act surprised because he told you he was going to break the law. He told you he was going to shred the Constitution. He told you that based upon Article 2 of the Constitution, that I guarantee you this fool hasn't read, he said he could do whatever he wants to. I just don't talk about it. So everything he does, he told you he was going to do it. The question is, what are you going to do? The question is, what are you going to do? Quote, President Trump does not appear to believe there is any such limitation on his power to use White House meetings, military aid, or other official acts to procure foreign help in his re-election, end quote. The president's conduct, which put, quote, his own personal and political interests above the interests of the American people, end quote, is exactly why they prescribed a remedy as extraordinary as the remedy of impeachment. Representative Adam Schiff said, chair of the House Intelligence Committee. Adam Schiff went on to say, we have a difficult decision ahead of us to make. And he explained that it will be a decision made by the House Judiciary Committee, and they're going to make the decision this week. They're going to impeach his ass, which they should have done months ago. Okay? So the report from the House Intelligence Committee puts the White House summary of Donald Trump's July 25, 2019 phone call with Ukraine's president at the center of the inquiry, calling it, quote, stark evidence of misconduct, end quote, stark evidence of misconduct, and, quote, a demonstration of the president's prioritization of his personal political benefit over the national interest, end quote. But the report claimed this conversation was, quote, neither the start nor the end of President Trump's efforts to bend U.S. foreign policy for his personal gain. That's an impeachable offense right there. The report claimed this conversation was, quote, neither the start nor the end of President Trump's efforts to bend U.S. foreign policy for his personal gain, end quote, which means he's done it again. Rather, it was a dramatic crescendo within a months-long campaign driven by Donald Trump, in which senior U.S. officials, including Vice President Mike Pence, the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, the Acting Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney, okay, who used to be over the Office of Management and Budget, the Secretary of Energy, Rick Perry, okay, and others were either knowledgeable of or active participants in an effort to extract from a foreign nation the personal political benefits sought by Donald Trump, the report stated. Now, during his Tuesday remarks, Tuesday, December 3rd, 2019, Representative Adam Schiff, chair of the House Intelligence Committee, said Americans should care deeply about whether the president is, quote, betraying their trust in him, end quote, and betraying the oath he took to the Constitution. Now, I ain't had no trust. The only trust I had in Trump is that he would be a traitor. That's the only trust I had in him. I ain't had no faith in him. I knew what he was going to do. That's why I tried to warn you. Okay? So, quote, if we don't care about this, we can darn well be sure the president will be back at it doing this all over again, end quote. Now, much of the evidence came from 17 closed-door interviews with key witnesses and over 2 weeks of public hearings in the month of November, with a dozen of those witnesses. In their public testimony, a number of those 12 witnesses confirmed and elaborated on the efforts allegedly made by Donald Trump, his associates, and administration officials to get Ukraine to announce investigations into those two issues, and why they believe delayed U.S. aid to Ukraine would only be released once the nation followed through on these demands. And when you read this, it was Gordon Sondland, if I remember correctly, who testified that Ukraine didn't even have to really do the investigation into Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. They just had to go on CNN and announce there was an investigation. Because Trump, once again, is trying to use a foreign nation to help him win another election. He did it in 2016. He said he would do it again when he was interviewed by George Stephanopoulos on ABC. And he did it again. Why are you surprised? Republicans on the House Intelligence, the House Oversight, and House Foreign Affairs Committees released a 123-page minority report this past Monday evening that argues that Democrats have failed to establish any impeachable offenses by Trump. Now, if you just switched all the names around, and this was President Obama doing this, let's say hypothetically, President Obama contacted Vladimir Putin and said, we'll release sanctions on Russia if you get me dirt on Donald Trump. When Trump was there in Russia in 2013 with the Miss America pageant, you know, when Trump was allegedly in the hotel room with the, you know, the two ladies of the night, what have you, whatever dirt you got on Trump, if you get that for me, I'll release sanctions that are on Russia. Okay? What, you think these same Republicans would be out here saying no impeachable offenses? Nothing to see here? Oh, aid was released, all this stuff? Just switch the names around and see if, just give the Obama test. Switch the names around and see if they would come to the same conclusion. So Republicans said there was no, so they released this little 123-page ridiculous report, okay, this past Monday. They said that they didn't find that Trump engaged in any wrongdoing and that there was no quid pro quo, even though Gordon Sondland said there was. And Gordon Sondland was handpicked by Trump to be a U.S. ambassador. Gordon Sondland ain't like a holdover from President Obama. That was somebody picked by Trump. Republicans said there was no evidence that Trump improperly withheld $391 million in military aid to Ukraine or pressured Zelensky to investigate Joe Biden to help benefit his 2020 re-election campaign, arguing that much of Trump's actions regarding Ukraine actually stems from his long-standing skepticism about the country due to its history of persuasive corruption. But Donald Trump ain't mentioned corruption in the July 25th, 2019 call with Vladimir Zelensky. He didn't mention corruption there. If he's so concerned about corruption. So I want to go, we're coming up on the break here. Let's squeeze in this first clip. Let's see, we got clip number 1 here. Highlights constitutional experts testify at Trump impeachment hearing this past week. Let's go to this clip from NBC News Now.
President Trump did not merely seek to benefit from foreign interference in our elections. He directly and explicitly invited foreign interference in our elections.
America will see why most people don't go to law school. No offense to our professors. But please, really, we're bringing you in here today to testify on stuff that most of you have already written about, all four, for the opinions that we already know, out of the classrooms that maybe you're getting ready for finals in, to discuss things that you probably haven't even had a chance to, unless you're really good on TV and watching the hearings for the last couple of weeks, you couldn't have possibly actually digested the Adam Schiff report from yesterday or the Republican response in any real way.
Pause it right there. Pause it right there.
And we can be theoretical all we want.
Pause it. Okay. Now that's Representative Doug Collins of Georgia, who in the past couple of days just said they need to delay the House Judiciary hearings because he needs time to catch up on the hearings that just took place. That's Representative Doug Collins of Georgia. He needs to be voted out of office also, Republican. Let's go back to this.
We digested the Adam Schiff report from yesterday or the Republican response in any real way.
Turn up a little bit.
Now we can be theoretical all we want, but the American people is really going to look at this and say, huh?
On the basis of the testimony and the evidence before the House, President Trump has committed impeachable high crimes and misdemeanors by corruptly abusing the office of the presidency.
I'm concerned about lowering impeachment standards to fit a paucity of evidence and an abundance of anger. I believe this impeachment not only fails to satisfy the standard of past impeachments, but would create a dangerous precedent for future impeachments.
Here, Mr. Collins, I would like to say to you, sir, that I read transcripts of every one of the witnesses who appeared in the live hearing because I would not speak about these things without reviewing the facts. So I'm insulted by the suggestion that as a law professor I don't care about those facts. But everything I read on those occasions tells me that when President Trump invited, indeed demanded foreign involvement in our upcoming election, he struck at the very heart of what makes this a republic to which we pledge allegiance. That demand, as Professor Feldman just explained, constituted an abuse of power.
The principle that in this country, no one is king. We have followed that principle since before the founding of the Constitution, and it is recognized around the world as a fixed, inspiring American ideal.
This impeachment would rival the Johnson impeachment as the shortest in history, depending on how one counts the relevant days. My kids are mad. Even my dog seems mad. And Luna's a golden doodle, and they don't get mad. Will a slipshod impeachment make us less mad? Will it only invite an invitation for the madness to follow every future administration? That is why this is wrong.
There are some additional high crimes and misdemeanors that are specifically identified in the text of the Constitution, correct?
Yes, that's true.
What are they?
Treason and bribery.
Do President Trump's demands on Ukraine also establish the high crime of bribery?
Yes, they do.
The Mueller report cites a number of facts that indicate the President of the United States obstructed justice. And that's an impeachable offense.
A president who will not cooperate in an impeachment inquiry is putting himself above the law.
Imagine a bank robbery, and the police come, and the person's in the middle of a bank robbery, and the person then drops the money and says, I'm going to leave without the money. Everybody understands that's robbery. I mean, that's burglary. I'll get it right. Yeah. And in this situation, we've got somebody really caught in the middle of it, and that doesn't excuse the person from the consequences.
Impeachments have to be based on proof, not presumptions. That's the problem when you move towards impeachment on this abbreviated schedule that has not been explained to me. Why you want to set the record for the fastest impeachment.
Did you write an article entitled "It's Hard to Take Impeachment Seriously Now"?
Yes, I did write that
and in
article.
that article, did you write, hold on, I'm limited on time. So,
I wrote
did you
that
write,
article.
since the 2018 midterm election, House Democrats have made it painfully clear that discussing impeachment is primarily or even exclusively a tool to weaken President Trump's chances in 2020. Did you write those words?
Until this call in July 25th, I was an impeachment skeptic. The
Very
call
well.
changed my mind, sir, and for
Thank
good
you. I
reason.
appreciate your testimony.
Okay. All right. Okay. So that was Representative Matt Gaetz from Florida, who needs to be voted out of office also, as well. He's one of Donald Trump's hitchmen, right? He tried to shut the professor up when the professor was trying to explain to him why he now supports impeachment of Donald John Trump. We'll continue this on the other side of the break because Professor Turley, who you heard there, who was the witness the Republicans brought, he got deconstructed on AM Joanne Reed show on MSNBC. 9:10 a.m. the Superstation, the Future Radio, the African History Network show. 313-778-7600. 313-778-7600. I'm Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes. Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation WFDF. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, December 8th, 2019. And we are live. Calling numbers 313-778-7600 if you have a question or comment. Okay, so we're continuing our discussion dealing with the impeachment inquiry and what just happened this past week. We saw the House Intelligence Committee release their 300-page report. I printed up the first 24 pages. I've been reading through that. I'm not sure if I brought it with me or not. I got so much stuff here. I got this file here. This is on impeachment inquiry. This is on impeachment. This is one file here, and I got a bunch of other stuff on it. Okay, but the clip that I just played for you, was that the end of that clip? Okay, the clip I just played for you, that was from NBC News Now, the name of that clip. So that's at NBCnews.com. The name of that clip is, I want you to go watch it again so you can see who was talking. Highlights, constitutional experts testify in Trump impeachment. Highlights, constitutional experts testify in Trump impeachment. That's at NBCnews.com. We'll post that here on the thread of the broadcast also, okay? All right, so you heard Harvard professor Pamela Karlan. You heard Harvard professor Pamela no, she was Stanford. Pamela Karlan. You heard Noah Feldman of Harvard University. You heard Michael Gerhardt of the University of North Carolina, and Jonathan Turley, who was the Republican professor. He was the Republican witness that that Republicans brought. He was the professor that Republicans brought. Jonathan Turley of George Washington University. So the hearing, which spanned over 8 hours on Wednesday, December 4th, 2019, featured these 4 constitutional law experts, okay, to give Americans an education on constitutional law, because 1, Americans are woefully ignorant of history. 2, we don't understand, a lot of Americans haven't read the Constitution, including the one sitting in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, and don't really understand constitutional law, don't understand impeachment, etc. All right, so I watched a lot of that 8-hour hearing, and I mean, it was very, very educational. So a senior Ukrainian official told the New York Times that so this information came out, I think it was December 3rd. Okay, then I'm going to get into what happened December 4th at that 8-hour hearing. A senior Ukrainian official told the New York Times that she and others knew about the hold on military aid in July of 2019, acknowledging for the first time that officials in Kiev were aware of the freeze during the Trump administration's pressure campaign. She said advisors to Ukraine's president sought to keep that fact from surfacing to avoid getting drawn into the American impeachment debate. So all these lies that Trump and his henchmen keep telling keep being debunked, keep being disproven. Now, Wednesday, December 4th, 2019 was a huge day in the impeachment inquiry. 3 prominent legal scholars testified Wednesday that the House Judiciary Committee, that Donald John Trump committed impeachable offenses when he attempted to condition a White House visit by Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky and aid to the country on the launching of political investigations into his political rivals. So if Trump is so concerned about corruption, right? One, why hasn't he investigated his own family? Why hasn't he investigated, he investigated Ivanka, he investigated his sons. Why hasn't he investigated Jared Kushner? If he's concerned about corruption. Two, what other, I haven't heard him talk about what other countries he's concerned about corruption in. When I listen to all of his Republican defenders, they haven't talked about the other countries that they're concerned about corruption in and launched investigations into, that Trump has launched investigations into, things like this. So, Wednesday, December 4th, we saw 3 prominent legal scholars testify at the House Judiciary Committee that Donald Trump committed impeachable offenses when he attempted to condition a White House visit by Ukrainian president and aid to the country on the launching of political investigations. The hearing, which spanned over 8 hours, featured 4 law professors, Noah Feldman of Harvard, Pamela Karlan of Stanford, Michael Gerhardt of the University of North Carolina, and Jonathan Turley of George Washington University. Professor Feldman, Karlan, and Gerhardt were called in by the Democrats. Turley was called in by Republicans, as I stated. One after another, and at times using blistering language, the trio of professors sitting side by side, who were called to testify by Democrats, told the committee that according to evidence against Trump that has been made public, Trump was guilty of high crimes and misdemeanors. High crimes and misdemeanors and other impeachable actions. So, I want to go to, let's go to clip number, I think we're going to clip number 2. Clip number 2 is Lawrence O'Donnell. Yeah, let's go to clip number 2. The last word, Lawrence O'Donnell. No Republican contested evidence of Trump's impeachable conduct. Let's go to this clip. Huh? Okay, we're going to this clip now. In just a second here.
Trump should be impeached. And the 4th says Donald Trump should not be impeached yet. The dissenting law professor at today's hearing, Jonathan Turley, did not actually defend Donald Trump's actions that are currently under investigation. Professor Turley simply argued that the House of Representatives should slow down and spend months fighting in courts to force the testimony of Trump officials who are refusing to testify. And after that, then maybe Donald Trump should be impeached.
Impeachments require a certain period of saturation and maturation. That is, the public has to catch up. I'm not prejudging what your record would show, but if you rush this impeachment, you're going to leave half the country behind. And certainly that's not what the framers wanted. You have to give the time to build a record.
The 3 other law professors testifying today, Noah Feldman, Pamela Karlan, and Michael Gerhardt, agreed that the president's unprecedented order to not testify issued to everyone in his administration is, in and of itself, an impeachable offense as obstruction of Congress. Jonathan Turley did not disagree that it could be an impeachable offense. He just suggested that the Democrats need to spend months in court fighting the president over those witnesses before writing that up as an obstruction article of impeachment. Harvard Law professor Noah Feldman said that he did not support impeachment efforts against the president until he read the call record of Donald Trump's phone call with the president of Ukraine, in which Donald Trump asked the president of Ukraine to announce an investigation of Joe Biden.
I'd like to focus the panel on the evidence they considered and the findings in the Intelligence Committee report that the president solicited the interference of a foreign government, Ukraine, in the 2020 U.S. presidential election. Professor Feldman, did President Trump commit the impeachable high crime and misdemeanor of abuse of power based on that evidence and those findings?
Based on that evidence and those findings, the president did commit an impeachable abuse of office.
Professor Carlin, same question.
Same answer.
And Professor Gerhardt, did President Trump commit the impeachable high crime and misdemeanor of abuse of power?
We three are unanimous. Yes.
The three law professors supporting impeachment now repeatedly cited specific points of evidence in making their case. Jonathan Turley never cited evidence in his repeated urging that Congress slow down in its gathering of evidence. Stanford law professor Pamela Karlan went out of her way to cite what she thought was the single most damning line of testimony in the impeachment inquiry.
I spent all of Thanksgiving vacation sitting there reading these transcripts. I didn't, you know, I ate like a turkey that came to us in the mail that was already cooked because I was spending my time doing this. And the most chilling line for me of the entire process was the following. Ambassador Sondland said he had to announce the investigations. He's talking about President Zelensky. He had to announce the investigations. He didn't actually have to do them as I understood it. And then he said, I never heard, Mr. Goldman, anyone say that the investigations had to start or had to be completed. The only thing I heard from Mr. Giuliani or otherwise was they had to be announced in some form. And what I took that to mean was this was not about whether Vice President Biden actually committed corruption or not. This was about injuring somebody who the president thinks of as a particularly hard opponent.
No Republican in the room responded in any way to that point raised by Professor Carlin. Jonathan Turley did not say one word about it. All of the Republicans on the committee pretended that Donald Trump withheld $400 million in military aid to Ukraine while he was properly evaluating Ukraine's fitness to receive such aid. Every Republican in the room knows they are all lying about that. They all know that the Defense Department certified Ukraine's suitability for such aid before Donald Trump blocked it. Every Republican in the room pretended that in the end, Donald Trump decided to send the aid to Ukraine, even though Ukraine did not publicly announce an investigation of Joe Biden, and therefore Donald Trump did nothing wrong. Every Republican in the room knows that they are lying about that. Every Republican in the room knows that Donald Trump only released the aid to Ukraine when the Democrats in the House of Representatives started investigating why Donald Trump was holding up that aid. And every Republican in the room knows that Donald Trump was warned about a whistleblower complaint about this before he released the aid to Ukraine. In other words, everyone in that room, Democrat and Republican, knows that Donald Trump released the aid to Ukraine only because he got caught in the act of illegally withholding it.
Does it matter? I'll ask all the panelists. Does it matter to impeachment that the $391 million, U.S. taxpayer dollars, in military assistance that the president withheld was ultimately delivered? Professor Feldman, does that matter to the question of impeachment?
No, it does not. If the President of the United States attempts to abuse his office, that is a complete impeachable offense. The possibility that the President might get caught in the process of attempting to abuse his office and then not be able to pull it off does not undercut in any way the impeachability of the act. If you'll pardon a comparison, President Nixon was subject to articles of impeachment preferred by this committee for attempting to cover up the Watergate break-in. The fact that President Nixon was not ultimately successful in covering up the break-in was not grounds for not impeaching him. The attempt itself is the impeachable act.
Soliciting itself is the impeachable offense, regardless whether the other person comes up with it. So imagine that the president had said, "Will you do us a favor? Will you investigate Joe Biden?" And the president of Ukraine said, "You know what? No, I won't, because we've already looked into this and it's totally baseless." The president would still have committed an impeachable act, even if he had been refused right there on the phone.
One of the things to understand from the history of impeachment is everybody who's impeached has failed. They failed to get what they wanted. And what they wanted was not just to do what they did, but to get away with it. And the point of impeachment is, it's made possible through investigation, is to
is to catch that person, charge that person, and ultimately remove that person from office. But impeachments are always focusing on somebody who didn't quite get as far as they wanted to.
All right. Okay, so that was from The Last Word on MSNBC. You can watch that clip at msnbc.com. It's entitled, No Republican Contested Evidence of Trump's Impeachable Conduct. Okay, excellent clip from Lawrence O'Donnell on The Last Word. Okay, so when we look very briefly here, and to keep up with a lot of this information, you can go to two good sources. One, NBCnews.com. They have an entire page dealing with impeachment and all the articles there in one place. Also, New York Times, because I read New York Times, NBC News, Washington Post. I monitor about 35 different news sources daily. Okay, New York Times, they have an impeachment inquiry email newsletter that comes out basically each day. And it comes out in the evening, which gives you a recap of what took place that day dealing with impeachment. Okay, so you can read that as well. All right, so what were those high crimes exactly that the professors talked about? Okay, the hearing turned in large part on the constitutional definitions of abuse of power, bribery, and foreign interference, ideas that the framers of the Constitution considered the grist of any impeachable case. Here are some of the ways that the scholars use those terms to argue for and against impeaching Donald Trump. One, when we look at abuse of power. So Professor Feldman said Donald Trump's withholding of military aid to Ukraine was critical to the definition of abuse of power, as it combined two central aspects. One, enriching himself and undercutting national security. He said, quote, "There's nothing wrong with someone asking for a favor in the interest of the United States of America. The problem is for the president to use his office to solicit or demand a favor for his personal benefit," end quote. He said of the July 25th call between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky, president of Ukraine, quote, "That's the definition of corruption under the Constitution," end quote. Now, Professor Gerhardt said that Donald Trump's pressure campaign and removal of the American ambassadors to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, was, quote, "an abuse of power that only the president can commit," end quote. Or, as Professor Feldman put it, to, quote, "gain an advantage that is not available to anyone who is not the president," end quote. When we look at bribery, because we know bribery and treason are mentioned in the Constitution, Article 2, Section 4 of the U.S. Constitution. Bribery and treason are mentioned. And treason is defined in Article 3, Section 3 of the U.S. Constitution. Treason, contrary to popular belief, treason is not being loyal to the president. Okay? That's not treason. Treason deals with aiding and providing comfort for a foreign government that's an enemy of the U.S. during a time of war, during a time of declared war. And we know that war is declared by Congress. Okay? So that's treason. Article 3, Section 3 of the U.S. Constitution. Just not being loyal to the president, not liking the president, speaking out against the president, that's not treason. Okay? So when you have a president saying something like that, that falls more along the line of a dictator. That's not treason based upon the Constitution. That falls more along the line of a dictator. Okay? And you can go to loc.gov, Library of Congress website. You can read the U.S. Constitution there. Also, you can go to archives.gov, which is National Archives. And we look here because I carry the Constitution around with me. Section 3, treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. No person shall be convicted of treason unless on the testimony of two witnesses to the same overt act or on confession in open court. The Congress shall have power to declare the punishment of treason, but no attainder of treason shall work corruption of blood or forfeiture except during the life of the person attained. Okay, so treason has nothing to do with not liking the president, saying bad things about the president. That's not treason. All right, bribery. Professor Colin, the only female on the panel, Pamela Karlan. Professor Pamela Karlan said that Donald Trump committed what the framers believed was bribery, regardless of whether he committed what the current federal criminal code establishes as bribery. She said when you ask for private benefits in return for an official act, or somebody gave them to you to influence an official act, that was bribery, end quote. So federal criminal statutes, federal criminal codes, right, don't have to be violated to commit impeachable offenses by the president. It's not the same standard. You could break those federal statutes, but you don't have to.
910 AM, can I get a name?
Okay, so Professor Turley argued that, quote, the language of the interpretation of federal courts, end quote, says that Donald Trump did not commit real crimes, a point that a Republican staff lawyer said moved Donald Trump's actions into the category of, quote, misdemeanors. Misdemeanors, okay? Misdemeanors are an impeachable offense as well, okay? We're coming up on a break. You listen to 910 AM, the Superstation, the Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep, the African History Network show. We'll be back in a few minutes.
Credit.
All right, stand by, everybody. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. Okay, we got Sandy. Racial history more than 2 centuries after it was designed to empower Southern whites. The Electoral College continues to do just that. The current system has a distinct adverse impact on black voters, diluting the political power. Southern states, red states are a prime example. Yeah, all that's true, Sandy, but in 2016, there was 16.4 million African Americans registered to vote. Yes, there was rampant voter suppression that took place. I don't think anybody talked about that more on this radio station than I did. Yes, there was Russian interference. I was warning you about that in 2016 and Russian disinformation campaigns, because I read the CrowdStrike report and the Fidelis report before the 2016 election, so I warned you about that. But in spite of the cross-checking system, the interstate cross-checking system, was not 1.1 million people off the voter rolls in 2016.
20 seconds.
Despite the fact that there were 868 fewer polling places, which I warned you about as well. There was a 7 percentage point drop in African-American turnout. Trump won Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania by 78,000 popular votes. Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation Future Radio. Hey, I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, December 8th, 2019. And we are live here. 313-778-7600 is the call-in number. We'll go to the phone lines in just a minute here. Let's see, Sandy on Facebook said, she talked about the Electoral College. And she said the Electoral College racial history, more than 2 centuries after it was designed to empower Southern whites. The Electoral College continues to do just that. The current system has a distinct adverse impact on black voters, diluting their political power. Southern states, red states are a prime example. Well, so let's break this down. Yeah, the history of the Electoral College. Now, also, the Electoral College was also created by people like Alexander Hamilton because there was a fear of factions breaking out. It wasn't just to empower Southern states or to give an advantage to slave-holding states. Okay, because it worked along with also because of the Electoral College and also because of Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 of the U.S. Constitution, known as the Three-Fifths Compromise, which we don't understand as well, which dealt with determining how to count enslaved Africans and slave-holding states to determine how many seats in the House of Representatives slave-holding states would have. So they said for the purpose of taxation and apportionment, that 3/5 of the population would be counted. It didn't say they were 3/5 of a human being. It says 3/5 of the population of enslaved Africans in a particular state would be counted to determine how many seats in the House of Representatives a slaveholding state would have, because representation in the House of Representatives is based upon population. So the North is arguing, well, you don't want to, this is determined at the Philadelphia Convention in 1787. The North is arguing Well, you don't want to even count them as human beings. So how are you going to how are you going to count them as one person in determining population, the population of a state like Virginia, to determine how many seats in the House of Representatives a particular state has? So they're going back and forth. In the North is saying, well, wait a second, if you count the full population of enslaved Africans, that's going to give the South an unfair advantage in the House of Representatives. You'll just be able to control the House and just get past whatever laws you want in the House of Representatives. So they're going back and forth debating this. Some say to count half the population. Some say 3/4 of the population. So they decided to count 3/5 of the population of enslaved Africans in slaveholding states. Okay? But the way that count was taken was corrected by Section 2 of the 14th Amendment of 1868. Now with the Electoral College, that deals with presidential elections only, the Electoral College. However, if we understood how our vote is being suppressed and why our vote is being suppressed, specifically African Americans, but not just African Americans, because white college students' votes are suppressed as well with voter ID laws, okay? Hispanics' votes are suppressed as well because there's a fear they'll vote Democratic. All right, but in the 2016 election, you've heard me talk about this before. I do a lecture, African American Resistance in the Era of Donald Trump, Voter Suppression, Reparations, and How Elections Have Consequences. I do another presentation, 6 Principles of Political Self-Defense, Understanding How Laws and Policies Impact the Economic Conditions of African Americans. 2016 election, well, let's back up to 2012. 2012, record number of African Americans voted. 66.6% of African Americans registered to vote voted in the 2012 presidential election. They had President Obama on the ballot. So it was probably almost 18 million who voted. I'm sorry, almost 18 million who were registered to vote. 66.6% actually voted. 2013, see what people miss is understanding law. Because a record number of African Americans voted in the 2012 presidential election, what happened was a backlash that, one, we weren't prepared for, two, we still don't understand. Because every city I lectured in this year, I asked people about Shelby County versus Holder 2013 U.S. Supreme Court case, and most of our people don't know about it. Now, they can tell you what happened with T.I. and Tiny and Hyman Gate. They can tell you what happened on Love and Hip Hop last week. They can tell you about Cardi B and Offset. But they can't tell you what offset the 2016 election. Shelby County versus Holder U.S. Supreme Court case 2013 was a backlash by Republicans to a record number of African Americans coming out to vote in the 2012 presidential election. What it did was gutted Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act in 1965 that we still don't understand. The Voting Rights Act, the House of Representatives this past week, led by Democrats, and they were basically the only ones who voted for it, because it was something like 193 Republicans that voted against strengthening and securing the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Imagine that. But Section 5 dealt with oversight. Oversight dealt with those states that had a history of putting obstacles in the way of African Americans voting. Most of them former Confederate states like Alabama and Georgia, Mississippi, okay? But in states where you had to have poll taxes, where you had to be able to, like in Mississippi, there were, I think, something like 282 sections to the Mississippi State Constitution. To be able to register to vote in Mississippi, African Americans had to be able to explain to the satisfaction of the registrar one of the 282 sections of the Mississippi State Constitution. If you watch Eyes on the Prize, they talk about this in Eyes on the Prize. Literacy tests, things like this. It was not illegal to vote for African Americans in these southern states. What they did was they put obstacles in the way of you voting. So Section 5 of the 1965 Voting Rights Act put the pre-clearance, and that dealt with pre-clearance, and that provided federal oversight. So any of these states that had a history of putting obstacles in the way of African Americans to vote, if they wanted to make any changes to the number of polling places that would be available for an election, to the number of hours polling places will be open, to the number of weekends that you can have souls to the poll voting when many African Americans go vote after Sunday church. Any changes, you had to get clearance from a federal judge. Well, what Shelby County versus Holder 2013 Supreme Court case did, as a backlash to a record number of African Americans coming out to vote in 2012, it gutted Section 5, it weakened it, so now those states did not have to have permission from a federal judge. So immediately after that, now all these states come out with new laws, new voter ID laws, new voter suppression tactics, because now they don't need pre-clearance from a federal judge. So in the 2016 presidential election, that was the first presidential election in 50 years that you did not have the full power or the full weight of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that most of African Americans today still don't understand. And there were 868 fewer polling places in 2016. Many of those polling places were shut down in African American communities. There were 868 fewer places you could vote in 2016. Today, there's 1,700 fewer polling places, which goes back to Shelby County versus Holder. What state is Shelby County in? Alabama. Alabama was the ground zero. Selma, Alabama. Ground zero for the fight for the Voting Rights Act of 65. So because we didn't understand history, because we didn't understand law, because we don't understand politics, we did not anticipate the backlash from the turnout in 2012. So when Shelby County versus Holder took place in 2013, most of us don't even know it existed. So then we don't understand how that influenced the 2016 election when you had a 7 percentage point drop in the percentage of African Americans registered to vote who actually turned out to vote. People think, well, it was because I saw on MSNBC this past week, and who was it? One of the, I can't get, sometimes I mix all the white ladies up because they get so many of them on MSNBC. But it was, I forgot which one it was. She was sitting there for somebody, and she said African Americans didn't vote because they weren't happy with Hillary Clinton. Okay? There was, quote unquote, a lack of enthusiasm for some. But that wasn't all that was that wasn't all that was involved. There was rampant voter suppression coming from Republicans, and there was a direct disinformation campaign from Russia attacking African Americans as well to suppress the vote, to get them not to vote, or get them not to vote for Hillary Clinton, i.e. vote for Jill Stein, or in some cases vote for Donald Trump or stay at home. If you read Volume 1 of the Mueller report, it talks about, one of the things they talk about with the Russian interference is how African Americans were attacked in the 2016 election. If you read the State of Black America report 2019 from the National Urban League, it talks about how African Americans were attacked as well, okay, in the 2016 election. I just saw it also. What was her name? Jan, MSNBC. I forgot her name. She was sitting in for somebody else. I think she was sitting in for Hallie Jackson or somebody on MSNBC. I forgot. But she talked about this. So usually, I notice on MSNBC, usually when they talk about what happened in 2016 and a downturn in African Americans voting, right? They don't talk about voter suppression targeting African Americans. And then Chris Jansen, that's her name, Chris Jansen. She said that, Chris Jansen, this past week on MSNBC. Okay, and they also don't talk about how we were targeted with a disinformation campaign by Russia, and it's going to continue in 2020. So if you don't understand what happened in 2016, then you're right to get your behind kicked again in 2020. Because they're going to use a lot of the same tactics. They're going to use a lot of the same tactics because you didn't figure out the trick in 2016. All right, so So we have to study, we have to understand that it's the vote by state that matters. That's why Republicans were targeting that's why they were targeting a lot of battleground states: Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. Donald Trump won Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania by 78,000 electoral college votes. He won Michigan by 10,704 votes. There were 54,000 people knocked off the voter rolls in Michigan because of the interstate cross-checking system, which was used in something like 23 states where Republicans dominated the state legislature and the governorship. And the interstate cross-checking system knocked 1.1 million people off the voter rolls. Now, most people don't even know this stuff exists. So if you don't understand what happened in 2016, because you don't understand how crucial the Voting Rights Act is and the impact that Shelby County versus Holder 2013 U.S. Supreme Court case had, and you don't understand what happened in 2012, then how are you going to understand what's going to happen in 2020 and the importance of 2020? This is understanding history and law. All this deals with history and law. Who chooses Supreme Court nominations? Who chooses Supreme Court nominations? The president. Who confirms Supreme Court nominations? The U.S. Senate. Who chooses federal judges? Who nominates them? The president. If you just saw what happened this past week, they just announced Republicans in the U.S. Senate have confirmed 170 federal judges that Donald Trump has nominated. 170 federal judges. These are lifetime appointments. He's nominated and gotten confirmed 1/5 of the federal judges. And the American Bar Association has come out on a number of these nominations and said these people are totally unqualified to be federal judges. And Republicans led by Senator Moscow Mitch McConnell in the U.S. Senate have confirmed them anyway. Because Moscow Mitch said that he basically said he wants his legacy to be getting confirmed as many right-wing conservative judges, federal judges, as they possibly can. These are lifetime appointments. So when we look at this here, we're going to continue and then we'll go back to the phone lines here. Bribery. Professor Colin said that Donald Trump committed what the framers believe was bribery, regardless of whether he committed what the current federal criminal code establishes as bribery. Quote, when you ask for private benefits in return for an official act, or somebody gave them to you in influence, to influence an official act, that was bribery, end quote. Now, Professor Turley, who was brought in by Republicans, argued that, quote, the language of the interpretation of federal courts, end quote, says that Donald Trump did not commit real crimes, a point that a Republican staff lawyer said moved Donald Trump's actions into the category of misdemeanors. In his, so he said this in the prepared opening statement. Foreign interference. Professor Pamela Carlin, said the founders were, quote unquote, especially concerned about foreign election meddling because they had just separated from Great Britain. So the Constitution is signed September 17, 1787. This is basically 4 years after the American Revolutionary War ends, which is 1775 to 1783. Okay? So, you know, you had the Declaration of Independence, 1776. You had the Philadelphia Convention in spring of 1787. And they're drafting the Constitution and debating different aspects of the Constitution. They separated from King George III, who was the king of Great Britain. So because they separated, there was a revolution against the British Empire. They're very concerned about foreign interference. This all ties into history. So Professor Carlin said the founders were especially concerned about foreign election meddling. Donald Trump encouraging Ukraine to dig up dirt on former Vice President Joe Biden, she said, showed Trump's belief in the propriety of foreign governments intervening. Propriety of foreign governments intervening in elections. Foreign governments don't intervene in our elections to benefit us. They intervene to benefit themselves. Now, Professor Turley, who the Republicans brought, cautioned lawmakers against an overly broad interpretation of what he called, quote, betrayal of the national interest, end quote, an offense he said Republicans would have likely accused former President Barack Obama of, quote. That's it. Well, you know, Republicans almost wanted to impeach President Obama for wearing a tan suit. So you remember that, right? Quote, that's exactly what James Madison warned you against. You would create effectively a vote of no confidence standard in our Constitution, end quote. All right, let's see here. Let's go to the phone lines. When we come back from the phone lines, I'm going to go to this next clip here. We'll go to clip number 3 of Nancy Pelosi. Let's go to the phone lines. Let's go to Keith. Keith, line 1. Hey, Keith, welcome to the African History Network show. Tell us where you're calling from.
Hey, what's up, man? I'm calling from Ypsilanti.
Ypsilanti? Okay. Ypsilanti, Michigan. Yeah, go ahead.
Right, so I guess I'm just wondering, you know Michigan is going to be like a battleground state. Not going to be, it's already in it.
Right. It was in 2016 also.
So what happens? How am I supposed to believe, or what should I believe? We got these black Republicans that's running back to the Democratic Party here in Detroit. Well, the Republican Party has always felt the same way about them. Okay, they were there for the same reason the white folk were, to do not pay taxes. You know, those policies. So how do we know that these black Republicans is jumping straight back into Democratic politics after denouncing the Republican Party? How do we know that's not Trojan horse?
I don't know who you're talking about, but you judge it based on a case-by-case basis and judge it based upon the policy. I don't know who you're referring to. I mean,
9 AM, can I get a name?
You know, we got black Republicans that just decided I can't take the Republican Party anymore, so I'm coming back to the Democrats.
Oh.
We didn't take an intermission. We didn't take an intermission or anything to try to read up on Democratic policy.
Right.
Okay? We're just jumping straight into politics, jumping straight into Democratic politics with Republican mindset.
Right. Probably judge them on that record. And it's if they jump, just speaking in general, not speaking of anybody specifically, just speaking in general, if they jump 1 minute from this political party to that political party, to the Republican Party, to the Democratic Party, after they were spouting Republican ideology, if they were spouting Republican ideology for years, and then they're going to jump to the Democratic Party, I mean, you have to still judge them on their record. Okay, Keith, I get these other calls, man. Thanks for calling in, okay? Keep listening. All right, let's go to my man, John. Hey, John, welcome to the African History Network show. Tell us where you're calling from, John.
Yeah, well, thank you, Hotep. I'm calling from the east side of Detroit.
Okay, go ahead.
He was hollering around and ready about cutting off over 700,000 people on some type of
on SNAP, on food stamps, SNAP, yep.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and they're getting a restriction on it. Most of them, which I know it all the time, most of them was white folks.
Right, most of them were white, yeah, and a lot of them probably voted for Donald Trump. And this, and this,
yeah. And he was saying that he was definitely gonna do it, and a lot of them ain't saying that, but I just wondering, did they get the message and so forth?
Well, it's going to kick in April of 2020. Now, this is after Donald Trump gave a $1.4 trillion tax cut to millionaires and billionaires.
That's right.
That he lied and said was for the middle class, but it wasn't. Okay. And so now what he's going to do is do this. Now what's interesting is a lot of the people who are going to be impacted are living in states that have a Republican state legislature and Republican governors. A lot of these poor Republican states like Kentucky, like Alabama, Mississippi, states like that. Okay, so it's going to be interesting to see what happens. The other thing is that you have CBS News has the article that deals with how about 40%, about almost half of Americans have jobs that are low-wage paying jobs.
That's right. That's
okay.
Right. That's right.
So Trump talks about this great economy, and he talks about a low unemployment rate, but he doesn't talk about how a lot of these jobs that he's bragging about are low-wage paying jobs. So people then have to have 2 and 3 jobs.
Someone got to get 2 jobs.
Exactly.
2 jobs.
Exactly. All right, John. Okay, keep listening, okay?
Okay, thank you. Keep up the work, man.
All right. Okay, all right. Let's keep going. Okay, I got to plug in the laptop here. I forgot to plug it in. Okay, I want to go to this clip here. Let's go to this next clip. This is, so, December 5th, Nancy Pelosi announced that she was going to move forward, that the House Judiciary Committee will move forward with articles of impeachment. Let's go to clip number 3 here.
Good morning. Let us begin where our founders began in 1776. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bonds which have connected them with another. With those words, our founders courageously began our Declaration of Independence from an oppressive monarch for, among other grievances, the king's refusal to follow rightfully passed laws. In the course of today's events, it becomes necessary for us to address, among other grievances, the president's failure to faithfully execute the law. When crafting the Constitution, the founders feared the return of a monarchy in America. And having just fought a war of independence, they specifically feared the prospect of a king president corrupted by foreign influence. During the Constitutional Convention, James Madison, the architect of the Constitution, warned that a president might betray his trust to foreign powers, which might prove fatal to the Republic. Another founder, Governor Morris, feared that a president may be bribed by a greater interest to betray his trust. He emphasized that this magistrate is not the king. The people are the king. They therefore created a constitutional remedy to protect against a dangerous or corrupt leader: impeachment. Unless the Constitution contained an impeachment provision, one founder warned, a president might, quote, spare no effort or means whatsoever to get himself reelected. Similarly, George Mason insisted that a president who procured his appointment in his first instance through improper and corrupt acts might repeat his guilt and return to power. During the debate over impeachment at the Constitutional Convention, George Mason also asked, "Shall any man be above justice? Shall that man be above it who can commit the most extensive injustice?" In his great wisdom, he knew that injustice committed by the president erodes the rule of law, the very idea of fair justice, which is the bedrock of our democracy. And if we allow a president to be above the law, we do so surely at the peril of our republic. In America, no one is above the law. Over the past few weeks, through the Intelligence Committee working with the Foreign Affairs and Oversight Committees, the American people have heard the testimony of truly patriotic career public servants, distinguished diplomats, and decorated war heroes, some of the president's own appointees. The facts are uncontested. The president abused his power for his own personal political benefit at the expense of our national security by withholding military aid and crucial Oval Office meeting in exchange for an announcement of an investigation into his political rival. Yesterday, at the Judiciary Committee, the American people heard testimony from leading American constitutional scholars who illuminated without a doubt that the president's actions are a profound violation of the public trust. The president's actions have seriously violated the Constitution. especially when he says and acts upon the belief. Article 2 says I can do whatever I want. No, his wrongdoing strikes at the very heart of our Constitution, a separation of powers, 3 co-equal branches, each a check and balance on the other. A republic, if we can keep it, said Benjamin Franklin. Our democracy is what is at stake. The president leaves us no choice but to act, because he is trying to corrupt, once again, the election for his own benefit.
1 minute.
The president has engaged in abuse of power, undermining our national security and jeopardizing the integrity of our elections. His actions are in defiance of the vision of our founders and the oath of office that he takes to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Sadly, but with confidence and humility, with allegiance to our founders and a heart full of love for America, today I am asking our chairman to proceed with articles of impeachment. I commend our committee chairs and our members for their somber approach to actions which the president had not made necessary. In signing the Declaration of Independence, our founders invoked a firm reliance on divine providence. Democrats, too, are prayerful, and we will proceed in a manner worthy of our oath of office to support and defend the Constitution of the United States from all enemies, foreign and domestic. So help us God. Thank you.
Okay, so that was from Thursday, December 5th. Nancy Pelosi announced that she would direct the House Judiciary Committee to proceed with articles of impeachment against one Donald John Trump. Okay, now this should have happened months ago. I told you that here on the show. After the Mueller report came out, it should have happened then, all right? So, then, later that same day, she did a press conference, and a reporter made the bad mistake of asking her this question that Representative Doug Collins of Georgia asked her. Okay, let's go to this clip from Lawrence O'Donnell. Clip 5. Okay, we got it coming up. Never seen anything like Pelosi.
Finally tonight, it's been a jam-packed and historic week of news with the announcement that
the House will draft articles of impeachment against President Trump, as well as Donald Trump's much-discussed NATO summit and Rudy Giuliani's latest jaunt to Ukraine. But there's one thing that happened this week that cannot be overlooked or lost in the news coverage. I was shocked when I heard it on Tuesday. I said then that it might be one of the most totalitarian-like statements issued yet by a member of the Trump.
Okay, yeah, never seen anything like Pelosi firing back at conservative reporter. That's the clip.
And with that, Nancy Pelosi guaranteed that Donald Trump will be the 3rd president of the United States.
It's impeached by the House of Representatives. The House Judiciary Committee will write and vote on articles of impeachment. Those articles of impeachment will pass in the committee and then be voted on by the full House of Representatives, and some or all of the articles of impeachment will pass the House of Representatives, and Donald J. Trump will take his place in history as an impeached president. We don't yet know the exact timetable for all of that, but it could happen before Christmas. The House Judiciary Committee has its next impeachment hearing scheduled for Monday, when they will consider the evidence in the House Intelligence Committee's written report of its impeachment investigation of the president's solicitation of help in his re-election campaign from the president of Ukraine by asking the president of Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden. After making her historic announcement this morning, the Speaker of the House went about her regular duties, including conducting later her regularly scheduled press conference about House of Representatives business, in which she discussed the 275 bills that she has passed through the House of Representatives with bipartisan votes that are all now on Mitch McConnell's desk in the United States Senate, where he is ignoring them and refusing to allow them to come to a vote. And then, when the Speaker was leaving that press conference, a reporter decided to shout out a question. The reporter is James Rosen, who spent almost as much time working at Fox News as disgraced sexual predator Bill O'Reilly, and who left Fox News, according to the New York Times, quote, after the network began scrutinizing sexual misconduct allegations against him. James Rosen now works for a much less prominent right-wing so-called news organization, and he asked Nancy Pelosi the kind of question that would have made his former Fox boss, sexual predator Roger Ailes, very, very proud.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Do you hate the president, Madam Speaker? Because
I don't hate anybody.
Representative Collins,
We don't hate anybody. Not anybody in the world. So don't accuse me.
I did not accuse you.
You did.
I asked a question. Representative Collins yesterday suggested that the Democrats are doing this simply because they don't like the guy.
I have nothing to do with it. Let me just say this. I think the president is a coward when it comes to helping our kids who are afraid of gun violence. I think he is cruel when he doesn't deal with helping our dreamers, of which we're very proud. I think he's in denial about the climate crisis. However, that's about the election. This is about the election. Take it up in the election. This is about the Constitution of the United States and the facts that lead to the president's violation of his oath of office. And as a Catholic, I resent your using the word hate in a sentence that addresses me. I don't hate anyone. I was raised in a way that is a heart full of love, and always prayed for the president. And I still pray for the president. I pray for the president all the time. So don't mess with me when it comes to words like that.
Understand we have nothing to show. Okay.
I wanted to let you see her walk away from that microphone and walk out of that room so that you could feel the power of the silence that she created in that room. Rooms full of reporters in Washington are never silent. I've never seen anything like that. I've never seen any member of Congress ever leave a room full of tough Capitol Hill reporters in stunned silence. James Rosen cowered in that stunned silence and did not dare throw the word hate at Nancy Pelosi again after she crushed him in front of every other Capitol Hill reporter, and now the millions.
All right, so now I saw it live when it happened, because when James Rosen asked that question, I said, "Uh-oh," because she walked away from the podium and she was talking to him. Then she went, because I was saying, "Go back to the podium, go back to the podium, so we can hear you through the microphone." She went back. Oh, she walked all over her. She walked all over him with her high heel shoes on. Watch that, MSNBC.com. That's from the Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell. Never seen anything like Pelosi firing back at conservative reporter. I bet you he won't do that again. See, that was that dumb question he asked that Representative Gary Collins of Georgia asked, who is the ranking chair of the House Judiciary Committee. Okay, he asked that dumb. He went and asked that dumb question about a statement that Doug Collins made. All right. Okay, look, we got to get out of here. These other topics, I'll do broadcast throughout the week. Follow us on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network. Follow me on my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP. If you like this type of information, you can donate to the African History Network. That helps us keep doing the research, finance the show, finance the research, etc. PayPal.me/the AHN show. PayPal.me/the AHN show. Or at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Click on the yellow donate button. Stay tuned for Pastor Mo. Remember, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world. Right now, it's corrects wrong behavior. It's not over till we win Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you next week. Peace.